The snow had fallen like feathers from a wounded sky, blanketing the world in hush and stillness. Elias Thorne paused at the edge of the tree line, axe in hand, his breath clouding in the cold morning air. The woods, so often filled with birdsong or rustling life, were silent now, so silent it felt like even memory had frozen. Behind him, the faint light from the cabin's single window flickered like a sentinel against the frost. His daughter was awake. He felt it in the way the smoke changed from the chimney, a rhythm to her mornings that matched his own heartbeat. He trudged back through the snow, boots crunching underfoot, and laid the axe by the shed with care. Inside, the warmth hit him like an old friend who never asked questions. June sat at the small table, legs swinging above the floor, a steaming mug clasped in both hands. Her dark hair was a tangle of sleep, and her eyes, large and unblinking, met his with quiet certainty. "You lit Mama's candle," she said. Elias nodded. He never forgot. Even when the dates blurred, the weight of that flame kept the calendar true. They ate in silence, as they often did. Words between them had grown rare but not empty. Each glance, each passed plate or tucked blanket, held more than full sentences could carry. After breakfast, June settled with a stack of picture books, while Elias stepped outside again, pulled by a restlessness he hadn't yet named. He headed toward the lower ridge where the deer sometimes passed, hoping to catch tracks, maybe find something to fill their larder before the next storm. Snow reached up to his calves, and the wind whispered through the branches with a sound like breathless prayer. He saw her just beyond the bend, a flicker of color against the white. Fabric not meant for the forest, not meant for weather or survival. At first, he thought it was an animal, injured, some poor creature dragged into the woods. But as he neared, his breath caught. A woman. Crumpled on her side, gown soaked and torn, skin pale to the edge of blue. The dress, white, layered, delicate as frost. Her hair was tangled with pine needles and ice, her lips cracked. A wedding dress. She looked like something forgotten by time. Elias dropped to his knees beside her. "Miss," he said, his voice rough from disuse and sudden panic. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered, then closed again. He touched her wrist. Weak, but there. Then he saw the bite. 2 dark punctures on her ankle, red and angry, snake bite. Without hesitation, he scooped her into his arms. She weighed nearly nothing, her limbs like folded paper. The trail back seemed longer now, the snow deeper, his breath more desperate with each step. He barely felt the cold. All he could see was June in the window and this woman bleeding time. Inside, the heat hit him like a wave. June stood up, startled, her cup falling and shattering on the floor. "Get the blanket," he said, breathless. "The thick one." She moved without question. Elias laid the woman on the couch gently, like she might crumble under his touch. He pulled off her boots, lace-trimmed, soaked through, revealing the swelling that climbed like ivy up her leg. He worked quickly. The snake kit was in the pantry drawer next to the spare lanterns. He cleaned the wound, drew what venom he could, applied the salve. His hands trembled once, then steadied. There was no room for fear. He wrapped her leg carefully, then pulled the blanket over her, tucked it to her chin. Her breathing slowed but didn't stop. She was fighting. June stood by the doorway, her small hand wrapped around the carved edge of the table. "Is she dying?" "No," Elias said, voice low. "She's resting." They kept the stove going all day. June stayed close, reading beside the woman's still form, glancing up after every page. Elias sat in the armchair, hands folded, eyes locked on the rise and fall of the woman's chest. Outside, snow continued to fall, gentle but unrelenting. The world was growing whiter, quieter. That night, Elias lit another candle, not for mourning, but for watching. He placed it on the way table beside the couch, where its light brushed the woman's pale cheekbones and trembling lashes. June had fallen asleep against the hearth, her head on a pillow stitched by her mother years before. Elias didn't move her. Instead, he sat again in the armchair, pulled the quilt around his knees, and watched the flames flicker across strange. Eyes closed in sleep, She woke just before dawn. It began with a shudder, barely more than a breath, and then her eyes opened, hazel, rimmed with confusion. She tried to sit, but her leg buckled under her. "Easy," Elias said, moving to her side. His voice was soft, steady. "You're safe." She blinked, taking in the room. Her eyes moved from the fire to June, still curled on the rug, then back to him. She tried to speak, but her throat cracked like dry wood. He handed her a cup of water, held it while she drank. After a moment, she managed a single word. "Where?" "My cabin," he said. "Snake bit you. I found you near the ridge." She stared at him, dazed, her voice a hoarse whisper. "The dress." He glanced at it, torn, dirty, draped over the back of a nearby chair where he'd laid it to dry. "I figured you didn't want it ruined." She gave a faint, almost bitter laugh, but it turned into a cough. Elias helped her sip more water. He didn't press her with questions. He just let her breathe. She slept again after that, but lighter, restful. Her legs still burned with fever, but color returned to her face. Over the next 2 days, she said little. Elias didn't ask. She moved from the couch only with his help, her gaze always drifting to the window, as if expecting something to find her or someone. She watched June read, helped her sort dried herbs by scent, and offered a shy smile when June braided a red ribbon into her wrist. Finally, on the 3rd morning, she spoke her name, Clara. Elias paused, setting a bowl of broth in front of her. "It's good to meet you, Clara." She nodded slowly. "Thank you for not letting me die." June piped up from her chair. "Daddy says everybody deserves to be carried at least once in their life." Clara's eyes glistened, but she didn't let the tears fall. She sipped the soup in silence, gaze lowered. That night, Elias stepped outside again. The stars blinked faintly through the snow clouds. He stood still, letting the cold bite at his skin. It had been years since another adult lived under his roof. Years since another voice stirred the air that wasn't his own or his daughter's. He didn't know who Clara was or why she'd been running, but he knew what it was to run from grief. He knew the look in her eyes wasn't just pain. It was a longing to stop disappearing. Inside, the candle still burned by the couch. Clara slept again, brow furrowed in dream. June lay near her, blanket half tucked under her chin. Elias stepped back in quietly and closed the door. The snow outside would keep falling. But something had shifted inside that cabin. It wasn't warmth or love, not yet, but something close, like the first crack of ice before a river remembers how to flow. The days passed gently, as if time itself had slowed to match the rhythm of Clara's recovery. Each morning, Elias stoked the fire and listened to the creak of the cabin settling deeper into snow. Clara began walking with careful steps, the pain in her leg still present, but dulled to a steady ache. She used a wooden cane Elias had carved from a birch branch. She said little about herself, but she was attentive, watchful in the way only someone who's lost a great deal learns. To be, June had taken to her quickly. Children had a way of sensing who needed kindness, and June gave it freely without explanation. She would sit beside Clara and braid her hair with bits of ribbon or wild twigs, whispering stories about stars or her dreams of planting a real garden in spring. Clara listened, her eyes soft with something like longing, though she never interrupted. Elias watched from a quiet distance, repairing the fence post, fetching water, chopping wood that stacked higher than any of them needed. Still, he moved slower now. His gaze lingered on Clara's silhouette by the fire, the way she folded her hands when she thought no one was looking. He saw the way she studied their small world, as though learning to speak its silent language. One afternoon, while the snow thawed just enough to turn slush beneath their boots, Clara stood near the back porch with Elias as he split logs. She wore one of Ruth's old coats, too big in the shoulders but warm, and the sleeves hid her hands. Her voice came hesitantly, almost startled by its own presence. "I was supposed to be married." Elias paused mid-swing. The air went still between them. She didn't look at him, only stared at the trees beyond the fence. He was wealthy, she continued, and kind in all the ways that counted, but I couldn't do it. It felt like walking into a room I'd never be allowed to leave. Elias let the words settle before replying. You ran. Clara nodded. I left the car in the valley. Walked through the night, thinking I'd make it far enough to disappear before anyone noticed. You nearly did. Her lips quirked in something not quite a smile. I was never very good at thinking things through. You were good enough to stay alive. I wasn't trying to. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It hummed with unsaid things. Elias turned back to the log and split it clean, the sound cracking open the sky above them. He didn't ask more. She didn't offer more. But she stayed, lingering on the porch even after he went inside. Later that night, Clara unfolded a small parcel she'd kept tucked in the lining of her coat. Inside was a faded letter, edges worn, words smudged. She stared at it for long moments before setting it on the mantelpiece beside Ruth's candle. Elias didn't ask about it, but he saw the way her fingers trembled when she touched the wax, the way her shoulders squared as if bracing for memory. The letter stayed unopened. The weather turned again. Snow returned with sharper teeth, and the wind howled around the corners of the cabin like a voice trying to get in. They remained indoors for 3 days, playing card games and baking bread that never rose right, but filled the air with warmth. Anyway, Elias caught Clara humming once, an old tune he couldn't place, and when he asked, she flushed and shook her head. Just something my mother used to sing, she said. He didn't press, but the song stayed with him, threading itself into the quiet moments like thread through fabric. On the 4th morning, the storm broke, leaving behind a glass world. Trees shimmered with ice, and the sun cast long gold shadows across the fields. Clara stood at the window a long time that morning, her breath fogging the glass. I dreamt of a key, she said quietly, hidden beneath a stone at the base. Of a sycamore tree. There's a well nearby, dry and covered with ivy. I haven't thought of it in years. June sat at the table, braiding cloth into makeshift dolls. Is it a real place? Clara hesitated. It's part of my family's land. It was. Elias looked up from the stove. Where? East of here, maybe 10, 12 miles, my grandfather's old estate. It's been empty for years. We used to go there summers when I was a child. She paused, then added, It belonged to my mother's side. After she passed, it was supposed to go to me. But my uncle kept it locked, said I wouldn't understand its value. Elias leaned against the counter, arms crossed. What kind of value? Clara's gaze shifted. Toward the fire. Gold, maybe, or something older. My grandfather was a strange man. He used to tell me stories. About maps carved into stone, secrets kept in walls. I thought they were just tales. But when my uncle refused to hand over the deed after I turned 18, I started to wonder. And now, Elias asked, I think he was trying to hide something. My uncle didn't want me to marry Henry, said he wouldn't protect the legacy, but I think he meant he wouldn't protect the secret. June had stopped braiding. Her eyes were wide. A treasure? Clara laughed softly. Maybe, or maybe just something someone wanted to keep buried. Elias said nothing for a while. Then he turned back to the stove. Well, that's a story worth chasing, Clara blinked. You believe me? I believe you believe it, he said with a soft half-smile. That's good enough for now. That night she stood by the fire staring at the unopened letter. Then, slowly, with trembling hands, she peeled back the seal. Elias didn't watch, but he felt the moment shift, like a bird lifting off a branch unseen. When she sat beside him at the table, her eyes were red, but clear. It was from my grandfather, she said quietly. He wrote it before he died. Said there's something waiting for me. A promise made to my mother before she passed. Elias looked at her, at the strength she didn't seem to recognize in herself. What are you going to do? Clara exhaled, as though letting go of something held for too long. I think it's time to go back. The next morning they packed provisions, bread, cheese, dried meat, and water. Elias brought a compass, a lantern, and his father's old hunting knife. Clara traced the route on a piece of parchment, her hand surprisingly steady. June watched them from the porch, wrapped in her mother's shawl. "Will you come back?" Clara knelt in front of her, eyes soft. "I promise." The sun had just begun to rise when they set out. Snow crunched beneath their boots and the wind had gone still. The world looked freshly painted. Trees coated in silver, sky streaked with pale blue. They moved slowly, the silence between them not heavy, but full. Clara walked with determination now. The cane tapped rhythmically against the ice, but her thighs were sharp, her steps sure. Elias kept pace beside her, glancing over his shoulder every now and then, making sure the horizon remained kind. They reached the first ridge by noon. Clara paused there, breathing in deeply. "It's just ahead," she said. "I remember the creek bend. We're close." Elias nodded. "We'll rest a while, then finish the last leg." She looked at him then, really looked. "You didn't have to come." "I know," he said, "but I wanted to." She smiled, not wide but real, and sat beside him on a fallen log. They ate in silence, sharing warmth from the thermos of tea Elias poured carefully into a tin cup. As they sat, the wind picked up just enough to stir the trees, scattering frost in sparkling spirals. Clara closed her eyes. "I'm not running anymore." Elias nodded, his voice quiet as the snow. "Good." They stood again. The house waited beyond the next bend, still hidden, but close. Clara took the first step forward, the letter tucked safely into her coat, her shoulders square against the cold. And Elias followed, quiet, steady, knowing that whatever they found, beyond that ridge, buried treasure or memory, it was something she needed to unearth, and he would not let her face it alone. The path curved around the base of the ridge, each step forward crunching over frost and packed snow. Clara's breath plumed out in measured bursts, visible in the morning air. Elias walked beside her, his boots breaking through thin sheets of ice with calm determination. The estate came into view slowly, first a crumbling wall of stone, then the shape of an iron gate twisted by time and rust. Beyond it, the old house stood like a memory that refused to fade. It was larger than Elias expected, 3 stories tall, its windows dark and lifeless, shutters broken or hanging loose. Ivy clung to the facade like veins, and snow blanketed the roof, muting its sharp angles. The once proud estate bore the stillness of something long abandoned, yet watched. Clara hesitated at the threshold. She reached out and touched the iron gate. "I haven't been here in 10 years. Elias didn't speak. He waited, letting her move at her own pace. Finally, she pushed the gate open. It groaned like a living thing, metal scraping against stone. Inside, the grounds, weeds, and skeletal hedges clawed up through the snow. The garden, once formal and pruned, was now a tangled maze. Clara led them down a worn path that circled the house's right wing. Her breath hitched as she passed an old bench, its slats split but still standing. "This is where my mother used to sit," she whispered. "She'd read to me for hours, mostly fairy tales, but sometimes poetry. She said words had weight, and I should learn how to carry them." Elias looked at her profile. She sounds like she mattered. She did, more than anyone ever understood. They came to the rear of the estate. There, half hidden under layers of ivy and snow, stood a sycamore tree, its bark peeled in patches, revealing pale wood beneath. Clara limped toward it with slow reverence. She dropped to her knees and began brushing snow away from the base of the trunk, her fingers raw from cold. Elias joined her without a word. Together they unearthed a flat stone, worn smooth by time. Clara's hands trembled as she lifted it, revealing a small iron key buried beneath. She held it up to the pale light, her eyes wide. "It's real," she murmured. He wasn't lying. Elias took the key gently, examining its age-worn teeth. "Any idea what it opens?" Clara nodded, a slight smile curling her lips. "The library." It was always locked after she died. My grandfather said it held things a child shouldn't see. I thought he meant grief. Inside, the house smelled of dust and cold air sealed too long behind doors. The front hall stretched long and empty, echoing each footfall. Paint peeled from the walls, and cobwebs clung to the corners like ghosts. Clara moved with caution but familiarity, her fingers brushing along the railing of the grand staircase as they ascended. The library was on the second floor, at the end of a narrow hallway lined with oil portraits. Faces of forgotten ancestors stared out with eyes too knowing. Elias watched Clara pause in front of one, her mother, youthful and vivid, locked in brushstrokes. She touched the frame, then moved on. The key clicked smoothly in the lock, the thay. The door opened with a hiss of stale air and dust. The room beyond was dim, with tall windows sealed by thick velvet curtains. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their spines faded. A thick desk stood at the center, and beside it, a fireplace choked with old ash. Clara crossed the room and pulled back the curtains, flooding the space with light. Motes of dust danced in golden beams. Elias stepped inside, absorbing the strange stillness of it. Something in the room felt preserved, untouched not just by time, but by grief. She moved with purpose, running her fingers along the spines until she found a volume bound in dark green leather. She pulled it free. Inside was a hollowed section with a folded parchment. Her hands unfolded it carefully, and she laid it flat on the desk. Elias leaned over her shoulder. The map was hand-drawn, edges frayed, with symbols he didn't recognize. A compass rose sat in one corner, inked in red. The paths were faint but led away from the estate toward a marked spot simply labeled the vault. Clara traced the path with one finger. "He hid it," she said. "Not treasure, not gold, but something more important." "What do you think it is?" "A record, proof of something, maybe about our family, maybe something political. My mother hinted at it once when I was small. Said there were things too dangerous for polite conversation." Elias looked at the map again, brow furrowed. "Whatever it is, your grandfather wanted you to find it." Clara sat back, exhaling. "And my uncle wanted it buried." They spent the next hour exploring the room. Behind one shelf, Elias found a false panel. It revealed a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Clara hesitated, lantern in hand. "We don't know what's down there." "We've come this far," Elias replied. "Let's see it through." The passage was narrow and cold. The air smelled of stone and old earth. Their footsteps echoed with eerie precision. At the bottom, they found a vault door embedded in rock. Another lock, but this time, no keyhole. Instead, a small bronze panel with 3 dials. Clara stared at it. A combination, of course. "Any guesses?" She paused. "My mother's birthday." The dials clicked into place. 04-17-62. With a shuddering groan, the vault door opened. Inside, rows of metal drawers stretched into shadow, each one labeled with years, some recent, others decades old. They stepped in, lantern casting flickering light. Clara pulled open a drawer marked 1979. Inside were files neatly organized, letters, photographs, newspaper clippings. She picked up one with trembling hands, a photograph of her mother and a man she didn't recognize, standing beside a marked survey map. "What is this?" Elias asked. Clara didn't answer right away. She flipped through more documents. The pieces came together slowly. Land deeds, reports, letters written in careful script. "My grandfather was part of something," she said finally. "An agreement, hidden from the government, something about land ownership and mineral rights. My mother tried to expose it before she died." Elias took one of the letters and read quickly. "This could still matter. If your uncle is covering this up and he holds the estate." Clara looked up, her eyes burning with clarity. "He's not just hiding my inheritance. He's protecting a legacy of corruption. And he tried to marry me off to ensure I never uncovered it." The weight of the truth settled over them, heavy and sharp. Clara gathered the files quickly, setting aside the most critical. "We can't take it all, but this is enough. returned to the surface as the light began to fade. Clara locked the library behind them and tucked the key into her pocket. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft and steady. The wind was calm. Elias looked over at her as they crossed the threshold. What now? We take this to someone who'll listen. A journalist, a lawyer? I don't care. My mother tried to do the right thing. I won't let that die with her. He nodded. You're not alone. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, without looking away from the trees ahead, she said, I never understood what courage was. I thought it was being fearless, but it's this, being terrified and doing it anyway. The return journey felt different, heavier with purpose. Clara walked taller, her limp less pronounced, as if shedding pieces of the weight she had carried. She no longer seemed like someone fleeing her past. She was moving toward it now, ready to confront what had been hidden. As the estate disappeared behind them, Clara turned for one last look. The snow caught in her hair, her cheeks flushed with cold. Her eyes were clear, unflinching. Whatever comes next, she said. I'm not going to be silent. Elias smiled faintly. Good. The truth needs a voice. And they walked on, two figures against a white horizon, toward a future built not on shadows but on what they now knew could never be buried again. A hush had settled over the valley, broken only by the rustle of dry leaves as dusk breathed its amber light across the mountainside. The old cabin, once just a sanctuary from grief, now held a different kind of silence, a waiting kind. Jacob moved with a slow, thoughtful purpose, stirring the fire with a long iron poker. Sparks crackled upward like fireflies. Behind him, Evelyn sat at the small table, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug, eyes lost in the soft golden swirl of tea. They had spoken little in the days since she'd told him the truth, about the treasure, the letters, and the men who had followed her that night into the woods. But Jacob didn't ask questions. Not anymore. He had once needed answers like oxygen, but now he understood that the heart rarely dealt in facts. It spoke in gestures, in silences, in what one chose to carry or leave behind. He watched her now, her hair lit from behind like a halo. She was thinner than he'd realized, still healing from the bite and the weight of her secrets. But she looked stronger too, like someone who had found a place to rest and breathe. I found something, she said softly, setting the mug down. Her voice trembled like a string pulled taut. Something my mother left. Before she died, she opened the small satchel she had never let out of reach and pulled out a faded envelope. Inside was a delicate map drawn on linen parchment, corners frayed like feathers. Jacob stepped closer, the air between them thick with memory and trust. The map smelled of cedar and thyme. She drew this? He asked, careful not to touch it. She did. Said if I ever needed to run, I should follow the river until it bent near the old sycamore. Then go west until I saw the stone with a cross. She never said what was there, only that it was hers, and it was meant for me. Jacob knelt beside her, studying the lines. You think it's the treasure? I don't know, maybe it's something better. They left at dawn. The mountains yawned with mist as they walked, her wrapped in his old coat, him with the rifle slung over one shoulder. Their breaths came out in puffs. Evelyn carried the map pressed close to her chest. The trail was faint, like a memory half buried, but Jacob's instincts, honed by years of solitude and sorrow, served them well. He knew these trees, this silence, the way light fell differently on untouched ground. Hours passed. A hawk circled overhead. Somewhere in the distance, water hummed. Evelyn stopped suddenly at a bend in the path. Before them stood a sycamore, gnarled and ancient, roots like reaching fingers. It's here, she whispered, somewhere close. They followed the map's markings step by step, counting paces, reading shadows. When they reached the cross-carved stone, they dug, not feverishly, reverently. Jacob's shovel struck something hard. They cleared away the soil. A cedar box emerged, its hinges rusted but intact. Evelyn dropped to her knees, hands trembling, as she opened it. Inside lay a bundle of letters, yellowed and ribbon-tied. Beneath them, wrapped in oilcloth, was a necklace set with a green stone that caught the light like a forest after rain. And beneath that, a deed. To the land they now stood on. Jacob exhaled, slow and long. Your mother left you more than treasure. She left me home. Evelyn's voice cracked like dry twigs, but the moment broke like glass. From the ridge above, voices, the thud of boots, men shouting, dogs barking. Jacob stood swiftly, rifle in hand. Evelyn clutched the box, her eyes wide with fear. They found us, she said, voice hollow. Run, he said, back toward the cabin. You know the way. I'll hold them. I'm not leaving you. He looked at her then, really looked at the woman who had become the gentle hum in his chest. Please. She nodded once, tears slicing down her cheek. Then she ran, the treasure pressed to her body like a lifeline. Jacob turned toward the noise. The fire in him, once dimmed by grief, now flared bright and sure. He took cover behind the stone, every sense sharpened. The men came into view, 4 of them, armed, hungry-eyed. They called for Evelyn, threats, promises. Jacob said nothing, he waited. Then he moved. Gunfire cracked like lightning. He hit 2 before they could react. The third fired wildly, catching Jacob in the shoulder. Pain bloomed. Still, he fired again, the E. Last man fled. Jacob fell to one knee, breath hitching. Footsteps. Evelyn. She dropped beside him, her hands pressing into the wound, blood staining her fingers. You're okay, you're okay. He looked at her, managing a faint smile. Told you to run. I found something better. Her voice was fierce, breaking. He faded, then woke. Days later, in the cabin. Light streamed through the window. Evelyn sat beside the bed, the deed on the table, the necklace around her neck. You're awake, she said softly. He reached for her hand. We're alive, she smiled. And we have roots now, both of us. Outside, snow began to fall, and the warmth of the small cabin, 2 broken lives quietly stitched themselves back together. If this story touched you, subscribe or share where you're watching from. These stories matter.